The most powerful weapon Iran built over 20 years wasn't a missile, wasn't a nuclear program, wasn't even their underground fortress cities. It was the illusion of invincibility. And that illusion just collapsed, literally taking billions of dollars of concrete and steel with it. But here's what should terrify every American watching this. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg just saw what happens when you ignore infrastructure for decades, and he knows the United States is walking the exact same path. Iranian military tunnels didn't fail because of American bombs. They failed because gravity, time, and neglect don't care about your propaganda. And right now, beneath American cities, the same forces are working on tunnels that move 3.6 million people every single day. The warning came in April when Iranian state media couldn't hide it anymore. Deep in the Zagros Mountains, sections of Iran's vaunted underground missile cities experienced structural failures. These weren't combat damage. These were catastrophic collapses of tunnels that Iran spent over $20 billion constructing across 2 decades. The facilities were supposed to be impregnable fortresses, carved into solid rock, immune to bunker busters and cruise missiles. The marketing worked. Western analysts spent years worried about these underground labyrinths. But nobody asked the simple question, who's maintaining them? The answer turned out to be nobody. Concrete degrades. Reinforcing steel corrodes. Mountain pressure increases, water infiltrates. Physics doesn't pause for geopolitical posturing. Iranian engineers knew this, sent reports up the chain, got ignored because maintenance budgets aren't as sexy as new missile programs. The result? Billions of dollars of strategic infrastructure reduced to rubble not by enemy action, but by the most predictable force in engineering. Deferred maintenance meeting reality. Now let's talk about American tunnel infrastructure because the numbers should make anyone paying attention deeply uncomfortable. The United States operates over 800 road tunnels across the country. The average age of these structures is over 60 years old. 20% of them have known structural deficiencies. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave transportation infrastructure a grade of D- in their latest assessment, the worst rating in 2 decades. The investment deficit, the gap between what needs to be spent and what actually gets allocated, sits at $2.6 trillion. 42,000 bridges are classified as structurally deficient. But bridges you can see. Tunnels hide underground, out of sight, out of political mind, degrading silently until catastrophe forces attention. Compare that to Iran's underground military network. Tunnels without regular inspections, structures built for propaganda value more than engineering longevity, maintenance budgets sacrificed for new construction. Sound familiar? The Lincoln Tunnel, connecting New York and New Jersey, is 113 years old for its oldest tube. It carries 120,000 vehicles every single day. Hurricane Sandy flooded it in 2012. Full repairs from that storm? Still not completely finished 14 years later. Estimated cost for comprehensive rehabilitation, $10 to $12 billion. Nobody wants to spend it. Nobody wants to shut down a tunnel that critical for the years it would take. So it keeps operating, keeps aging, keeps degrading. Pete Buttigieg became Secretary of Transportation in January 2021 with massive promises. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed that same year, $1.2 trillion approved for American infrastructure renewal. 5 years later, execution has been glacial. Critical tunnel projects remain in planning phases. Buttigieg held a press conference after the Iranian tunnel collapses became public. His tone was defensive, almost dismissive. He said different systems, different contexts, implying American tunnels face no comparable risk. Republican critics immediately called it negligent denial. Progressive Democrats expressed frustration with the slow pace of actually deploying approved funds. Civil engineers who have been screaming about tunnel degradation for years felt ignored yet again. When directly asked if American tunnels are safer than Iranian military tunnels, Buttigieg stumbled through bureaucratic language about robust inspection systems, except the data contradicts him. Inspection cycles run every 2 years for most tunnels when annual inspections are recommended for critical infrastructure. 40% of major tunnels have maintenance repairs delayed 5 or more years past recommended schedules. This isn't robust. This is hoping nothing breaks before the next administration. Let's examine 4 critical tunnel systems that represent existential economic vulnerabilities. The Baltimore Harbor Tunnel, part of Interstate 895, opened 51 years ago. It runs 2.1 kilometers under Baltimore's harbor. 35,000 vehicles use it daily. Its primary function is serving as the main cargo artery for the Port of Baltimore, the 3rd largest port in the United States. Structural rating from the American Society of Civil Engineers, C-. Problems include constant water infiltration, advanced corrosion of reinforcing steel, and ventilation systems running on technology from the 1970s. If this tunnel fails, whether through collapse or forced emergency closure, the Port of Baltimore effectively shuts down. Economic impact, $150 million per day in lost commercial activity. A typical major tunnel repair takes 6 months minimum. Do the math. $27 billion in economic damage from one structural failure that engineers have been warning about for over a decade. Move to California. The Caldecott Tunnel System in Oakland consists of 3 parallel tunnels cutting through the Berkeley Hills. The oldest opened 91 years ago in 1933. Combined daily traffic, 162,000 vehicles. This is the critical connection between San Francisco Bay Area and the interior of Northern California. Here's the nightmare scenario. This tunnel sits directly on the Hayward Fault. Seismologists give a 70% probability of a 7.0 or greater earthquake hitting that fault in the next 30 years. The tunnels were built to 1930s seismic standards. Minimal reinforcement upgrades have occurred since original construction. A comprehensive seismic retrofit plan exists. Estimated cost, $2.8 billion. That plan has been delayed 3 separate times due to funding disputes and political unwillingness to commit resources. If a major earthquake hits before that retrofit happens, 500,000 residents could be cut off from the Bay Area. Regional economic collapse follows immediately. Travel to Boston. The Sumner and Callahan tunnels run under Boston Harbor. Ages: 86 years for Sumner, 65 for Callahan. Combined daily traffic, 90,000 vehicles. These tunnels provide the only direct connection between Logan International Airport and downtown Boston. Current condition is borderline critical. Water leaks in 40% of tunnel segments, advanced corrosion detected in structural support cables. The electrical system is largely original equipment. Boston's Big Dig project built newer tunnels in 2003, and even those already show significant problems. The old tunnels, they're operating on borrowed time. If they fail or require emergency closure, Logan Airport becomes functionally disconnected from the city it serves. Boston has the 4th largest metropolitan economy in the United States. Severing that airport connection even temporarily creates cascading failures across the entire Northeast corridor. But nothing compares to the New York City subway system for sheer scale of vulnerability. 665 kilometers of underground tunnels, average age over 80 years. Daily ridership, 3.6 million passengers. 14 separate tunnels cross under the East River, most of them over a century old. The problems are systemic and terrifying. Climate change has intensified urban flooding. The drainage systems were designed in the 1800s. They cannot handle current precipitation patterns. Electrical infrastructure is obsolete. The maintenance backlog exceeds $100 billion. Compare this to Iran's missile cities. Both are underground networks. Both were built with specific strategic purposes. Both require constant maintenance to remain functional, and both have been neglected to the point where structural integrity is no longer guaranteed. The difference is New York's tunnels carry millions of civilians every day. An Iranian military tunnel collapses, it's a strategic embarrassment. A New York subway tunnel collapses during rush hour, it's mass casualty event followed by economic paralysis of the largest city in America. These 4 systems represent 2 layers of infrastructure that define modern civilization. There's the visible layer, highways, bridges, oviaducts, things you can see and inspect easily. Then there's the invisible layer, tunnels, subway systems, underground utilities. The invisible layer follows a political principle that's been true for 40 years. Out of sight, out of political priority. Successive administrations, both Republican and Democratic, have made grand infrastructure promises. Execution always falls short. The culture defaults to emergency patches instead of systematic renewal. It's cheaper politically to fix something after it breaks than to prevent it from breaking in the first place. The result is an underground layer of critical infrastructure degrading silently, invisible to voters, ignored by politicians, until gravity and physics force catastrophic attention. It's the same mentality that destroyed Iran's tunnel network. Build impressive structures, take credit, move on to the next project, ignore maintenance, hope it holds until you're out of office. It works until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, the foundation is already cracked beyond simple repair. The economic dependence on these tunnel systems is almost impossible to overstate. The United States economy measures $28 trillion in total GDP. Over 60% of commercial flow depends on transportation infrastructure functioning reliably. Tunnels represent only 15% of the interstate highway network by distance, but they're concentrated in urban centers where economic density is highest. They're not optional redundancies. They're critical choke points. Imagine the failure sequence. A critical tunnel closes either from collapse or emergency structural concerns. Traffic reroutes to alternatives. Those alternatives immediately overload. Supply chains fragment. Regional economy starts hemorrhaging. Effects cascade nationally within days. We've seen smaller versions of this. The Interstate 35W bridge in Minneapolis collapsed in August 2007. 13 people died, 145 injured. The cause was structural failure from deficient original design combined with excessive load and deferred maintenance. Economic impact was $400,000 per day in traffic delays alone. That was one bridge in a medium-sized metropolitan area. Now imagine the Baltimore Harbor Tunnel, $150 million per day for the 6 months a typical emergency repair requires. $27 billion in economic damage, or imagine Caldecott after a major earthquake. Regional reconstruction costs exceeding $500 billion, or imagine a New York subway tunnel failure during morning rush hour. You can't even calculate that impact. You're talking about potential paralysis of a megalopolis that generates over $1 trillion in annual economic activity. Buttigieg's response to the Iranian tunnel comparison has evolved through 3 distinct phases, each worse than the last. First response, outright denial, claiming no comparison exists between military tunnels and civilian infrastructure. Second response under media pressure, admitting challenges exist, but insisting contexts aren't comparable. Third response during congressional testimony, a veiled admission that significant challenges exist but framing them as manageable with current resources. The pattern is reactive, not proactive. It's PR management, not infrastructure policy. Bipartisan criticism has been sharp and specific. Senator Ted Cruz said billions spent, tunnels ignored. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez connected it to climate justice, pointing out tunnels are first to flood in extreme weather. A coalition of 12 governors demanded a federal tunnel emergency plan. The administration's counter-narrative emphasizes successes with surface roads and bridges, infrastructure you can photograph for press releases. But engineers keep pointing to tunnels as structural time bombs. The opposition frames tunnels as forgotten infrastructure. And they're right, you can't ribbon cut a tunnel repair, there's no political glory in maintenance. So it doesn't happen until crisis forces it. And by then, the cost multiplies by factors of 10 or more. 4 systemic failures define 40 years of infrastructure negligence. Inspection protocols are inadequate. Critical tunnels need annual detailed inspections. Most get cursory reviews every 2 years. Maintenance is perpetually deferred. 40% of major tunnels have repairs delayed 5 or more years past engineering recommendations. Modernization has stagnated completely. Tunnels operate using safety and structural standards from the 1970s. Financing remains catastrophically insufficient. The $2.6 trillion infrastructure deficit isn't a future problem. It's money that should have been spent over the past 2 decades and wasn't. Evidence of crisis is everywhere for anyone willing to look. Emergency tunnel closures have increased 300% comparing 2015 to 2025. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave transportation infrastructure a D grade in 2021. By 2025, that dropped to D-, the worst rating in 20 years. The pattern is clear. React to emergencies, never prevent them. Wait for failure, then scramble for funding. Rinse and repeat until something catastrophic happens. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed in 2021 with massive fanfare. Total approved $1.2 trillion. Amount specifically allocated for tunnel infrastructure, $12 billion, barely 1% of the total. Amount actually dispersed through 2026, $3.8 billion, only 32% of what was allocated for tunnels. In 5 years of implementation, results are microscopically small. Tunnels repaired or modernized, 47 out of over 800 total, less than 6%. Major projects completed, 0. Gateway Tunnel, Caldecott retrofit, Baltimore Harbor modernization, all still stuck in planning phases. The average time between approval and breaking ground is 4.2 years. Bureaucracy versus execution. Bureaucracy wins every time. Compare internationally and it becomes humiliating. China constructed 16,000 kilometers of new road tunnels between 2010 and 2025. Switzerland mandates preventive maintenance on 100% of tunnels every 5 years without exception. The United States has infrastructure aging faster than the capacity to renew it. We're losing ground every year. The gap between current condition and minimum safety standards widens annually. New challenges exist now that didn't when most American tunnels were built 60 to 90 years ago. Climate change has fundamentally altered risk calculations. Urban flooding events are exponentially more frequent and severe. Tunnels designed for historical weather patterns can't handle current precipitation intensity. Cyber vulnerability is entirely new. Modern tunnel control systems connect to networks, making them theoretically hackable in ways that were impossible in analog eras. Traffic loads have increased dramatically. Vehicles today are 40% heavier on average than the design specifications tunnels were engineered to handle. Study the Hugh L. Carey Tunnel, formerly Brooklyn Battery. Hurricane Sandy in 2012 flooded it with 60 million gallons of water. Repair took 14 months and cost $800 million. Current protection against the next superstorm, according to FEMA's 2024 assessment, 60% adequate, meaning 40% vulnerable to repeat catastrophic flooding. And storms like Sandy are now projected every 10 to 15 years instead of the historical 100-year interval. Dr. Sarah Chen from MIT Civil Engineering said American tunnels were designed for 20th century climate but operate in 21st century conditions. The ASE 2025 report concluded 40% of road tunnels in the United States would not survive an extreme climate event without catastrophic failure. These aren't hypothetical risks. These are engineering certainties waiting for triggering events. International perception of American infrastructure decay is quietly reshaping geopolitical calculations. European allies express private concerns about supply chain reliability for transatlantic trade dependent on American port access. China uses American infrastructure decline as a central element of their broader narrative about inevitable American deterioration. Investors are beginning to factor infrastructure risk into valuations of assets dependent on reliable transportation. This connects directly to national security in ways that should alarm Pentagon planners. 70% of rapid military mobilization routes include critical tunnels. Strategic ports in Baltimore, Oakland, and the New York-New Jersey complex all depend on tunnels, currently rated as structurally deficient. Resilience, the ability to absorb shocks and maintain function, is directly undermined by degraded infrastructure. During an April 22 Senate hearing, Senator Mark Warner asked Buttigieg directly, "Iranian tunnels collapsed from neglect. Are ours safer?" Buttigieg began answering with, "We have robust inspection systems," then got cut off by senators reading contradictory data into the record. His credibility on this issue is at historic lows, because everyone can see the gap between talking points and reality. The philosophical failure is bipartisan and spans decades. Previous administrations of both parties practiced reactive maintenance, fixing things only after they broke. The current administration promised ambitious transformation but delivered bureaucratic execution. The common pattern: avoid long-term investment because the political payoff comes after you leave office. Engineers have been screaming about deferred maintenance, creating exponential debt since the 1990s. Politicians ignored them because tunnels don't win elections. Invisible infrastructure doesn't generate votes. So systems continue degrading until failure forces attention, at which point costs have multiplied beyond control. The irony is almost poetic. Iran invested billions in military tunnels that collapsed from neglect. The United States won't invest adequately in civilian tunnels that sustain the entire economy, setting up the same inevitable collapse. History provides clear lessons for anyone willing to learn. The Morandi Bridge in Italy collapsed in 2018, caused deferred maintenance. Result: 43 dead. The Sasago Tunnel in Japan failed in 2012, cause inadequate inspections. Result: 9 dead. The pattern is global. Aging infrastructure plus negligence equals inevitable disaster. The United States is walking precisely the same path, just moving slower and with more warning signs being actively ignored. Here's the American paradox in its purest form. Largest economy on the planet. Cutting-edge technology across multiple sectors. Space programs, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, all world-leading. But underground infrastructure still operates on 19th century foundations, literally in some cases. The capacity exists to fix this. Resources are available. Technology is proven. What's missing is political will to act preventively instead of reactively. Infrastructure doesn't collapse all at once. It crumbles slowly, silently, invisibly, until one day a crack becomes a chasm and what was fixable becomes catastrophic. The mechanism is already in motion under American cities. Tunnels age, inspections get delayed, maintenance gets deferred, degradation accelerates, extreme weather events add structural stress, and eventually physics demands payment for decades of neglect. When systemic failure comes and engineering certainty says it will, the economic collapse will be regional at minimum, potentially national, depending on which tunnel fails first. The Iranian tunnel collapses provide a perfect mirror. Iran built military tunnels, then neglected them, and they failed from predictable structural degradation. The United States built civilian tunnels decades ago, has neglected them systematically, and they will fail from identical predictable structural degradation. The only difference is the United States has advanced warning and abundant resources. What's missing is courage. Political courage to spend money on invisible infrastructure. Bureaucratic courage to cut through red tape. Societal courage to accept short-term disruption for long-term safety. Buttigieg can keep deflecting. Governors can keep waiting for federal money. Congress can keep debating. But tunnels don't wait. Physics and time don't negotiate. They don't care about election cycles or approval ratings or whose fault it is. And when the collapse comes, and every structural engineer will tell you it's coming, it won't be for lack of warnings. It will be for lack of courage to act while action was still possible. The question has never been if. The question is when, and where, and how many people are inside when gravity wins. How many tunnels need to fail before this gets taken seriously? 800 road tunnels across America. 160 with known structural problems documented and filed and ignored. 0 comprehensive federal emergency plans. The Iranian collapse was the warning. Buttigieg saw it and looked away. Every governor knows about tunnels in their state that are barely holding. Every civil engineer has sent reports that got shelved. Every commuter drives through tunnels every day assuming someone else verified they're safe. That assumption is wrong. The infrastructure is failing. The politics is failing. The only question left is whether enough people pay attention before the concrete does what concrete eventually does. When you ignore it for 70 years, it falls.